Welcome back to Behind the Screams. Thank you for joining us this wonderful Tuesday night, just before Halloween on Friday. So, what are you going to be watching for Halloween? What is going to be your Halloween day films? Mine are going to be The Exorcist, which is a multiple times a year watch for me. It's going to be The Exorcist, and it's going to be Halloween, and it is going to be American Werewolf in London. Those are the three that I have picked for this year. Halloween is every year for me. I watch the original 1978 one and then throw a couple ones in the mix it up a little bit. So that is what I have on my list. Those are classics for me. And like I said, The Exorcist, that is one that I watch multiple times a year. Some of my other favorite ones to do during the Halloween season or on the day of Halloween, I like Pumpkinhead. I like the original Dawn of the Dead. I like Psycho. I'll last year I did the Terrifier movies, All Hallows Eve, just to name a few. Night of the Demons is one that I enjoy for Halloween. Of course, Trick or Treat. That one is definitely a must watch during this time of year. And the thing is there are just so many good movies that fit for that day that I kind of cycle through them. But Halloween is always a must for me. I have to do that one. But tonight, we are not talking about Halloween or The Exorcist or Dawn of the Dead or anything like that. We are going to be more modern and we are going to be looking at the movie Weapons that came out in 2025. Now, this one was one that was hyped up a lot. And I know some people really liked it, some people didn't. My take on it is I thought it was a good film with a very original plot. I enjoyed a lot of what they did. I do think it was overhyped. I went into this thing with high expectations and it didn't quite meet those expectations, but that doesn't mean I didn't enjoy the movie. And that doesn't mean that the movie isn't good. And that does not mean that there are some great themes that really hit home in this movie. And that's what I liked about it. There were themes that I'm going to talk about tonight that I think are so pertinent for modern day viewers. Now, this movie was directed by Zach Kreger, and I thought he did a great job with the casting, the storyline, even the execution. I have no complaints about any of that. Actually, I don't really have very many complaints about the movie at all, other than just I feel like it was hyped up way too much. And so the bar for me was set really high. Like I was expecting to go into this movie and just be totally blown away, like nothing I'd ever seen before. And that just wasn't the case. But it is still worth seeing. And there are a lot of great thematic elements. There are a lot of intense moments. And the ending is so satisfying, extremely satisfying. I have to say, one of the most satisfying endings for me in a horror film. It just really, it was what you wanted to happen, and even more so. Uh, and the movie itself, it gets a R rating for some profanity. There are some sequences of violence. Some of them are really intense. The gore is really intense, but it's not one of these movies that is a gore fest. It has it in there, but this movie relies on storytelling. It relies on tension and plot and character that really drive this movie, which I appreciate. Now, don't get me wrong, I love my slasher flicks and things like this, but my heart is in the horror movies that really drive home a story and they have a point to be made in them. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love the Exorcist so much. Is it's not so much about demon possession as it is about Damien Karras. So but we're not going to talk about The Exorcist tonight. I will refrain from that. So let's get into weapons here for a minute. So this movie takes place in the suburban town of Maybrook. And in this town, 17 children from the same third grade class suddenly leave their homes in the middle of the night at 2:17 a.m. and they vanish. And you only have one child, Alex Lilly, who is left, and he goes to the school the next day, is sitting by himself in a classroom. So as you can imagine, there is this panic that ensues among the school and among the parents, and this investigation that begins to happen. And as it goes on, you can just see just the unraveling of this community due to the trauma that happens. So this is the basic premise of the story. And from that premise, you have multiple threads that work its way into what is going on. Okay, you have the teacher, the third grade teacher, Justine. She is under suspicion. They think she has done something to the kids. You also have the grieving parents, and that's another subplot going on in this. And then you have the, for lack of a better word, witch Gladys, who is the old lady who comes in, and she is very domineering. And then you also have the town that is just unraveling from the inside out. So as I watch this movie, and as I begin to notice some of the themes, and then go back and read what other critics have said about this movie, there are definitely multiple themes that people have picked up on and that come out of this movie, because it is very rich in thematic content. And I'm going to go through some of what I think are some of the best themes that jump out in this movie, along with some themes that other folks have picked up on. So I'm going to run through that list. We're going to talk about it and make some application to modern day society. One of the first things that we see in this film is it is basically about a corruption of childhood innocence. And it is the title weapons, and basically what you have going on is there's a weaponization of childhood that screams forth from this plot. So this is one of the main interpretations that I walked away with, and I read that others kind of picked up on the same thing too, is that the missing children in this film, they represent an innocence that is corrupted by it's corrupted and it's weaponized by adult forces. Now what's interesting, and you have all these people picking up on different themes and debating the meaning of the movie, that the director, when he made this script and he produced it, in some of the interviews he talks about that there really wasn't a main theme, that it was meant to be kind of intertwining in all of this, and that this movie is about an expression of trauma and some of his trauma that he went through in childhood. And so he leaves it kind of ambiguous for basically you as the viewer to kind of walk away, and you're left with interpreting what he has just put on the screen for you to watch. So the title weapons itself, is not referring just to a literal weapon, but it's a metaphor, and it's talking about children being turned into tools or weapons for adult agenda and adult control. The other theme in this movie is you have generational trauma that comes out, and a decay of the community. And this reflects on how trauma can travel through generations, and how a community, because what you see, this community just begins to rot from the inside, and you see how ordinary people can become complicit, and they can get caught up in all kinds of scapegoating and stuff. We'll hit that in another point. But the complicit idea that I saw screaming in this movie is, now there are spoilers in everything that I do, so just be aware of that. One of the things that I saw that spoke about this theme of compliance is Alex, the young boy who's left alive, and Gladys the witch comes to his home because she's somehow connected to the parents, and she gets Alex's parents basically in through her spells into this compliant state where she can do whatever she wants to him, and that leaves Alex vulnerable to her. And she's got the spell and she can make the parents do what they want, and she threatens Alex and saying, if you don't listen to me, if you don't obey me, I can hurt your parents really, really bad. So there's this manipulation that goes on, and you have this theme of control and bringing parents into compliance, leaving the children exposed. So that's a theme as well. Then you have this idea of ambiguity and grief, or this real kind of existential horror that is weaved throughout the film. And like I said, Kreger had noted that weapons, there's not a single, what is this movie supposed to mean? And he's kind of hitting at the horror is not just about the monster. Although Gladys, there is definitely a monster, a real monster in this film, but it is about the horror of loss, the horror of trauma, the horror of community failure, and of grief without any type of clear resolution. And what I mean by that is you really don't get why so much Gladys does this. Now I'll have to go back and watch the movie again. Maybe there is something in there, but I don't recall anything of why she is doing what she is doing to the children, other than power, manipulation, and control. And another theme that comes out is you have basically a witch hunt that happens and a blame game. I mentioned Justine Gandy, the teacher, the third grade teacher, who it was all of the kids in her classroom who disappeared, 17 kids at 2:17 a.m. I'm going to go back and talk about some of those actual particular themes in certain movie scenes and how these all connect, to show that I'm not just pulling it out of the air. But the community blames Justine. She is the first person that they start to blame. As the movie goes on, we see that she has, a little bit of a checkered past, nothing too bad. Definitely nothing that would make her be a suspect in this, but because she was their teacher and because it all happened with the students in her classroom, they immediately shift the blame to her. And the film does a great job of examining how easily groups look for a scapegoat rather than face the systemic issues. And this is a huge, huge metaphor for modern society, for modern politics, for modern religion. We see this all the time. It happens. You take a people group, or you take a certain race or ethnicity or religion or sexual orientation, and you begin to scapegoat that. And what happens in politics is that you create all of these scapegoats by saying, this is the problem, this person, these people, this, and you're pointing the blame and you're shifting the blame onto a group of people. And the scapegoating happens and happens and happens. The people get blamed. They try to do something to deal with the people. But guess what? The problems are still ongoing because the issue are not getting dealt with. It is scapegoating at its finest, because the systemic issues that run deep in our politics is not about these other things. The whole system is flawed. The whole system is broken. When you have systems that run off of greed and power, it's not about gay marriage. It's not about abortion. If for example, you think Trump is pro-life, you think he's pro-life, you really think he cares about that? A guy who won't release the Epstein files, politics that guards sexual predators? Give me a break. Right? That's hypocrisy at its finest. And the whole pro-life thing is just something they do to garner votes. They don't care. He doesn't care about the unborn babies. If he was truly pro-life and truly cared about these things, then release the Epstein files. Stop guarding predators who have harmed children. Stop trying to cover for them. And that's what I'm talking about. The whole system. It is run by greed and power. And you see the same thing in certain religious circles. You see sexual predators, people who have abused, that the church guards them and safeguards them, tries to silence the witnesses, silence the people from speaking out, because it is a positioning, a jockeying of power. And I can tell you this: wherever greed is operating uh, in a society or in a church, the spirit of the Lord is absent from that. Bring some Christian theology into this. The New Testament compares greed to idolatry multiple times there in the New Testament, and says that this even shouldn't be named among believers. And so when you have a church or a group of churches that is functioning and running off of greed and hiding behind this and using money and power to silence and manipulate, that is not of God. The Spirit of God is nowhere in that. And you can hoist a politician up all that you want and call him God's man, but when he is fueled by greed and corruption and power, you are lying to yourself. So this whole scapegoating, it's all a smokescreen to hide the real systemic issues that go on. Now, the Christian gospel is meant to subvert all of this, right? Greed and idolatry is not even to be named. The New Testament speaks about spirit-filled living and how that is to look, about counting others better than yourself, about having humility of mind, about you see in the book of Acts, the early church, they took care of each other's needs. There wasn't a one of them that went without, with there was no lack. And you see this idea of mutual reciprocity, of weeping with those who weep, rejoicing with those who rejoice, of lifting one another up. There is this certain equality across the board that the gospel message is meant to bring, that the Spirit of God brings into the life of people, subverting this whole power structure and this whole power play. And Paul talks about in Philippians 2 how Christ himself didn't count his equality with God as something to be grasped, his rights of God. He didn't hold on to those, but he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death. And then he was highly exalted. So Christianity subverts this whole thing. The last shall be first, the first shall be last. And that's why we're to have humility of mind. That's why we're sought to love our neighbor and to lift others up and to fight against injustice and to fight against greed. Now, I heard something the other day, how somebody had said that the Christian gospel is not about social justice, that it's about personal salvation, and that's just not New Testament theology. Yes, is there a personal aspect of salvation where people are called to repent and believe the gospel? Absolutely, but all throughout the pages of Old Testament through New Testament, there is social justice in the kingdom of God is meant to bring that type of social justice to earth. That's the type of kingdom living that Jesus wanted his followers to display to the world, to be a light. That is how we see that the kingdom of God is manifest upon this earth. So the movie Weapons does a brilliant job of bringing this idea of subversion and witch hunt and scapegoating to the forefront. And it is such a metaphor, I think, for how we see things going and taking place in our modern society. The next theme that comes to light is you have this idea of the small town, right? Small towns always play a big part in some of the best horror movies, and there is a reason for that. Sometimes small towns are creepy. Sometimes, there is just this. There's a power structure. There's things you don't move outside of. There's things that don't change. If you push against the grain, then there are consequences for that. So the setting of Maybrook here, this small town, it definitely is a microcosm for America under pressure. I like reading that in one review talking about the small town Mayfield being basically just like a microcosm to talk about American American society and how these pressures with the hidden vices of apathy, of this veneer of stability that is cracking. And we are on that precipice, right? With the way things are financially in this country and the way things are headed, right? The financial backings and foundations and things we see are cracking under this current administration. And I think the director does a great job of showing how, Mayfield has this look of this great small town, but when you get below and beneath, you see that it is not what it seems. The scapegoating, the turning on each other, uh, the trauma that is going on. That basically beneath this veneer, everybody's world, because of what's happened with the children, is falling apart. So the movie Weapons is this multi-layered piece of cinema that doesn't have one definite answer when we say, what is this film about? Right? It's about loss, children vanishing, families breaking, communities fracturing. It's about power and control, who has it, who loses it, how people get used. It's about the exploitation of children, and you definitely see that with this witch Gladys and what she does, right? Children in society are supposed to be protected and precious, um, and it is something that falls on all of us to do. And you see the just when the idea of complacency and complicitness comes in, when we stop standing up for children and the protection of children, which again is why it's so important that these Epstein files be released and people held accountable for this. Right, this is a huge moral issue, and the children that we are entrusted with deserve our protection. And the complicitness that happens when Gladys takes over, with Alex's parents, is just such a frightening picture of what happens when we as adults begin to just let the wickedness of greed, power, corruption take over in our society to where it starts to harm our children. So that is a theme in this about how power and greed and control can harm those who are the most innocent in societies. It's about blame and failure, right? The scapegoating that happens with Justine. Instead of dealing with the systemic issues, they just pick her and they blame her. It's about trauma and the echoes and the imprints that it leaves, and it is about something ordinary becoming monstrous as well. So the horror in this movie arises from the human systems, the human relationships, and not just the supernatural threat of Gladys herself. So there are a few symbolisms that I want to talk about that connect to these themes, just for those of you who have seen the film that you can pick out. And then for those of you who are going to watch this movie and haven't seen it yet, those scenes will jump out at you. So the the first scene is basically when all the 17 children disappear at 2:17 a.m. So this is a moment of fixation and of a ritual, right? You have this exact time that implies that this is not random. And then you have the 2:17 matching with the 17 children. There's definitely something ritualistic happening there. And so the disappearance here, this underscores the theme that I've talked about in this movie of childhood innocence being weaponized and hijacked, and they're taken out at night, which is one of the most vulnerable times. So you see that this wickedness moves in and happens when the children are at their most vulnerable. The kids leave their home in this trance-like state. And so the night and the darkness serve as just this metaphor, not only vulnerability, but also of the unknown. And the children's departure is basically their journey from going to this safe environment to loss and innocence and this collective trauma that being under Gladys's spell is going to put all of these kids through. Um, and then you have Justine, the teacher, right? She becomes central to suspicion. I've mentioned that as a theme in the movie. She's ostracized. She struggles with alcoholism. She goes into some relapse, and then she starts getting some paranoia. And so she's this idea of the scapegoat. She can also be the idea of basically the caretaker institution that is made to fail or is scapegoated, and her unraveling can, represent also the breakdown in community trust. You see that happen. She was supposed to be trusted. These parents trusted her with their children, and something happens to the children and they immediately turn on her and blame her for what happens. And then the town appears normal. It begins to crack, and all of this junk begins to come up during the midst of this stress with the children not being found and nobody knowing what happened. And this setting of this town is, like I said, it stands for the facade of normalcy, the facade of a great functioning church, a facade of a great functioning society, facade of a great functioning family, when at its roots there is a breakdown and there's systemic evil and things that aren't being addressed. So this is weapons broken down. Like I said, it has no one meaning. It has no one thing. This is a multi-layered film, and there's so much going on here. So if you haven't seen it yet, it is streaming on HBO Max. So if you have Max, you can watch it. I know it's also available to rent on Amazon and on Apple, but very original movie. It is good. It's worth renting. It's worth watching. And like I've said in this podcast, the themes that are working here are just phenomenal. Now, I'm not I'm not trying to overhype this movie because that's why it fell short for me, because it was overhyped. But I do want to give kudos where it is deserved and justice where it is deserved. This movie plays those themes well and it is good. Now, is it the best horror movie that you're ever going to see? Some people may think so. I don't think so. But it's definitely impactful, especially when you understand the themes and what the director is hitting at. It really leaves it's a gut punch. So check Weapons out. This is definitely one that you want to see. It's horror, it's mystery, it's thriller, all kind of wrapped up in one. Again, the end of this movie is very, very satisfying, and the kill and the gore at the end is just fantastic, and how it goes down. So two thumbs up. Definitely give Weapons a watch. Um, and I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing for the show next week. I do have a huge surprise for everybody, though, that I will be announcing later. But until then, you can join me on Sunday nights for Southern Discomfort as we are going through holy horrors and talking about different supernatural and paranormal beings in Scripture. So until next time, come join me for Southern Discomfort, and then we'll be back again Tuesday night at 8:30 for more behind the screams.